He accuses the developers of using the Olympics as an excuse to evict these people for redevelopment. And he says that the Olympics are being used to show off to the foreigners at the cost of the lives of ordinary people here. It's worth understanding that this is happening across the whole city of Beijing. Some sources say that up to 1.5 million people have been moved from their homes to make way for redevelopment ahead of the Olympic Games. And all of this is happening without any organisation to represent the interests of those evicted householders. It was hard to find anybody brave enough to speak on behalf of those who had been forcibly evicted from their homes. We managed to contact an activist whom we were told would help us. We were supplied with a code word to set up the meeting, and now we've been called to a house where we've been told he will have gathered some people to talk to us. Liu Anjun was waiting for us in the street. I was shocked to discover he'd been disabled after a brutal assault while defending his home against demolition. 捅了我这地儿是4刀，扳倒他呢打了是将近有长的口子，打了是4处。 Mr. Liu was attacked by 4 thugs sent by the developers, and this is what he looked like afterwards. They broke both of his legs, one of his arms, they fractured his skull, and they stabbed him 4 times. He continued campaigning and was given 2 years in jail for disturbing public order. There, he says, he was tortured. He said that inmates were given electric shocks by the police and that he was forced to stand for 3 days without any rest or sleep. And when he fell down, he was roused with cold water. Liu and his wife normally stay in touch with the victims' network over the internet. But today they'd gathered some people to meet us. They'd come to Beijing as petitioners, but told us they were afraid of being either jailed or expelled from the city. Whatever claim of ownership ordinary people have to their homes, if they resist eviction, they face violent intimidation. We're going to a block of apartments where we've heard the residents are holding out against a company of developers who want to knock their flats down to make way for luxury new apartments, which are getting huge prices now in the year leading up to the Olympics. Half of these apartments have been abandoned, and you can see broken windows, and they're derelict. And over there is the new apartment block that's just gone up. All around the buildings there are these slogans. This one's about trying to alert the foreign media. There are other slogans talking about how people want to stay here until they die. This elderly woman told us the developers had moved their workers into abandoned flats. The workers, she says, defecate and urinate outside here and dump all of their rubbish just right outside her apartment where she's living with her little grandson. Inside it got worse. The sewage pipes had been sabotaged in a campaign to drive them out. Film that. I mean, there is raw sewage flowing out across the apartment. They built these barriers here to stop the flow of sewage, which, as you can see, must be quite deep, from getting into their apartments. Now the threats had turned to violence. Oh dear. We visited Zhu Xiguang and his scared family. He says that he was riding his bike when he was attacked by 2 men who beat him up, hurting his leg and his arm. Who do you think beat you up? He said he thought his attackers were linked to the developers. He is one of the 3 leaders of the committee that have been fighting the evictions. And after he was beaten up, the other 2 leaders were given threatening phone calls, and the developers said, if you don't move out, the same thing will happen to you. Downstairs we found a 70-year-old man who'd received threatening phone calls. He was too scared to be identified, but his bloodied face and shirt told his story.
2 days ago, he was taking his early morning exercise in the park. Two men came up from behind him and began beating him. They smashed him in the eye and in the nose. They knocked him down. They beat him up for a few minutes and then they ran away. Do you think that the police are investigating this seriously?
He said the police promised to investigate, but he had no confidence they would help him.
I sense that possibly he feels that there's a little bit of collusion between the developers and the authorities.
Beijing's makeover means the flattening of historic districts known as hutongs. They're the heart of the city's culture and community. But many are overcrowded slums where residents would happily trade up to gleaming new high-rises if only the compensation was good enough. Most of this district has already been reduced to rubble, despite widespread objections.
So that's a picture of what they're going to build here instead. It's called the New Fortune Business Building. Problem is, there's still a home right in the middle of the building site.
It's known as a nail house. The developers want it banged down flat. The owners have hung on for 5 years. Then the husband died a week before we arrived, on the day of his funeral. The event had become a rallying point for unhappy residents, but the police were determined to stop it turning into a full-scale protest.
This is a demonstration that grew out of the demolition of a residential area. There's nothing political about it. Most of the people here, a few dozen of them, are elderly or clearly quite harmless, and yet they're surrounded by uniformed policemen, plainclothesmen filming them all. The atmosphere is really quite intimidating. She said that she's not scared about being filmed by us, but she is terrified of being filmed by the police. Her house was knocked down and she says she was beaten up and made deaf.
We tried to get in to visit the widow, Mrs. Lee. Half her house had already been demolished by thugs, in spite of a court order halting eviction.
Okay, right, we don't seem to be allowed in there. This is all an area that has been knocked down here. Yeah. Hi. Okay. Not allowed? What's going on here?
We're just maintaining the public order.
The family tried to invite us in, but the police stopped us.
It's okay to look in the house?
No. It's not allowed to come here. That's my place.
They stopped the funeral going ahead as well.
They just don't want any kind of